What is going on, guys? Welcome to Gunfighter Life. Today we're going to talk about 22 trainers set up for hunting. If that interests you, stay tuned to the podcast. We talk about guns, gun-related subjects, tactical hunting, all manner of things. Gun and gun adjacent, the right way with God Almighty at the center, biblical Judeo-Christian values, and real-world first-hand experience. I'm blessed to serve you as host. Bullet points for the bio and the show notes. But first and foremost, I am a Christian, a servant of God, and a follower of Jesus Christ. All right, let's talk about 22 trainers. Let's talk about that. Let's talk about 22 trainers, getting them set up for hunting. Now, obviously, the ideal would be get an exact replica with all the same setup as your hunting rifle or whatever your platform was, right? If you were hunting with a Smith & Wesson revolver, let's say 44 Magnum, if you could get exactly the same size, weight, trigger pull, sights, everything identical, except for the recoil, obviously, and the cost of ammo, you would get it set up exactly the same. You're probably not going to do that, though, right? So you're probably not going to get an exact replica. Let's say you hunt with a Remington 700 and 308. You're probably not getting a Remington bolt-action rifle 22 with the exact same length stock, exactly the same weight, exactly the same length barrel, exactly the same sights, or exactly the same scope. That would be the ideal, but let's not let perfect be the enemy of good here. Anything is better than nothing as far as training goes with a 22. If you hunt with, a bolt-action 30-06 and all you have for a training rifle right now is a Ruger 1022 semi-auto, that's better than nothing, right? It's still going to give you some benefit to train with. So again, don't let the perfect be the enemy of good. Don't let it stop you from training. But I'm going to talk through a couple of points of what I think is important and things that are less important. It's important that both rifles fit you well. And what I mean by that is I'm talking about hunting not off a bench, not off a bipod. I'm talking about hunting in practical, classic shooting stances, standing, sitting, kneeling, prone, and some improvised positions, braced off a tree or whatever. You should be able to bring the gun up to your head, not bring your head down to the gun, but bring the gun up to your head, and you should be able to have that gun point fairly naturally. That's important. That's important for your hunting rifle, and it's important for the 22, right? We talked about the 10-22 and a bolt action. Yeah, working the action is important, but if you can bring that gun up and get good, quick, accurate first-round hits on target, hopefully you won't need a second. And you can do the dry fire with your center fire bolt action. You can dry fire the bolt working the bolt. You can, do the dry fire, which you should be doing whether you have a 22 or not. Dry fire and then quickly reload the bolt action and just do that dry fire. But to confirm that your dry fire is working, bringing that gun up and getting a quick snapshot on target from mostly a standing position, but then a kneeling position, a sitting position, a prone position, working on, moving up stealthily to a position of advantage and putting down a pack or something and getting a good hit on target. That is important. And you can do that with a 22 as long as they both point pretty well for you, as long as they both work pretty well. Also really important is the trigger. So obviously if you could get them both identical, that would be pretty awesome. But that's probably going to be hard to do. Even if you get two guns made from the same company, like a 22 Savage trainer and a 22 Savage bolt action, they may not have the same trigger. So what I'm going to tell you is they should be closer. You don't want a super hair featherweight trigger on your hunting rifle and then a crazy heavy, because that can become worse than just dry firing with your rifle, I think. But err on the side of having a slightly heavier trigger in your 22 trainer. If they're not going to be identical, go for a little bit heavier trigger in the 22 trainer. If you can shoot a longer, grittier, heavier trigger well, then you should be able to shoot a lighter, crisp, 3.5 pound trigger well that's in your hunting rifle. Case in point, it's like, working with a garbage Glock factory trigger. If you can shoot a factory Glock trigger well, you can shoot pretty much any other handgun better, because the Glock trigger is like dragging a piano down a gravel road. It's just gritty and grindy and smashy, and eventually it breaks. It's just garbage. But if you can shoot that Glock trigger well, and many people can, and you can if you practice with it. If you can shoot a Glock trigger well, pretty much any other handgun trigger on the planet that wasn't made by, Russians in the Cold War is going to be a delight by comparison. Much less drastic than that, if you're shooting your 22 trainer, then have it have a little bit heavier, maybe a little bit longer, less clean trigger. If you can master that trigger, you can probably master the trigger on your hunting rifle, or when you transition to your hunting rifle to get some rounds downrange with it, you'll be better with it. I would rather have that than the inverse, where I was doing a bunch of training with a light, crisp, clean, half a pound trigger 22 target rifle, and then I pick up my, deer rifle and it's got a 5.5 pound trigger because I have some Cold War 303 infield sporterization abomination, right? If you're going to do that, just get a really bad trigger in your 22. But you get what I'm saying there. That's kind of important. If you're going to shoot with a scope for your hunting rifle, then shoot with a scope on your 22. 22 scopes are cheap and affordable. They don't have to be anything special. One of the classic ones is like a Simmons 22 mag scope, fixed 4X. That's a great scope. The exact magnification for your 22 trainer I don't think is super critical. If you hunt with a 3-9 on your hunting rifle, you can still train with a 4X scope, right? Obviously, drop and drift and stuff is going to be far different, far less with a modern centerfire bottlenecked cartridge than with a 22 long rifle. So there's not a lot of crossover there unless you're like hunting with a 45-70. That might be pretty close to a 22 long rifle as far as drops and stuff go. But assuming it's not, I wouldn't worry too much about it if you're a max point blank range hunter. Use the 22 trainer for focusing on the fundamentals. Stance, grip, sight alignment, sight picture, trigger control, follow through, all these things on the 22. Also, being able to call your shots and being able to be patient and know when your presentation, when all that stuff put together, executed properly, is going to give you a hit or a miss, right? Know where that line is, and miss a bunch in practice, like pushing yourself for speed on a snapshot so that you don't miss the deer in real life. I should wait extra half a second and get a better shot, then rush this and miss. Those are things I think that are really important that you can train with the 22. Now, on this note, I did write, my wife actually, we're getting ready for hunting season. My wife is a little concerned about getting a good shot off on a big game animal. She's hunted big game before, but not a lot. And she wanted a training regiment for this, practicing. Now, I have a couple of 22 bolt action trainers that I like to use to train for a hunting season. Deer and elk season coming up. Hopefully, by God's grace, we'll fill the freezer. And she asked me to kind of write her a little training regiment. And since I did that, I figured I would talk about it a little bit for you. And we might tweak this or train this a little bit different. But here's what I have as far as rough notes. And everything's going to be shot at 50 yards. That's a good range to practice at with the 22. So if your 22 is not sighted in, you need to sight it in. That should go without saying, but get it sighted in. So the next one is to build some confidence. Again, I'm not talking about hunting with a bipod. I'm not talking about hunting with, off a rest, because there's no naturally occurring bench rests in the wilderness where I hunt. But hasty rests. So the most common one is a pack for us, because we're probably going to have to pack out our animal. So we usually carry packs in so we can pack the animals out, and we might get stuck out overnight or whatever. So having her throwing the pack down and then getting down on the pack, assuming there's time for all this, and getting a good shot off using the pack for a rest. This is probably going to be the best, most stable position in the field, unless some crazy circumstance happens and it's just like a perfect. So assuming you're not going to get a better rest than that, it's, the best position you're probably going to get for a field position consistently is just throwing your pack down and getting down on the pack in a prone position and getting shots off. So I would start off with that. You're not shooting for groups. You're shooting for a decent size, let's say 3-inch target at 50 yards, trying to get some good hits, not taking as long as you can, but taking a little bit of time to get in a proper position. Hunting and guiding, I've seen far more people miss animals and say, oh, I never got a shot. And I'm like, you had, 30 seconds to get a shot, which is, 27 seconds longer than you needed. It's not going to be a perfect position with no movement without the animal moving like on a bench. If you wait for that, you're probably not going to get a shot. So get down in a prone position, get the pack down, get the rifle on the pack, and get a good enough position to get a good solid hit. And do that a few times. Let's say 3 times. Practice that in threes until you're comfortable with it. And then move on to the next thing. Well, what's the next thing? Let's look at that. The next thing I had is going to be prone off the pack and then 3 shots in a row, like shoot, shoot, shoot. And so instead of dropping down, throwing the pack down, getting on the pack and getting a shot off and doing that over and over again, dropping down and shooting and getting 3 shots. Hopefully you never need more than 3 shots in a hunting scenario like that. But sometimes follow-up shots are needed. Hopefully only 1 follow-up shot. Even if it's not needed, it's always a good idea. But usually a good idea if the animal's standing that you put another round in it. So there you go. That's another thing you can practice, getting down in that prone position, getting multiple shots off. And then I have practice from a kneeling position at 50 yards, 3 shots. For this, you might want to move to a bigger target, 6 to 8 inch target. But practice getting in the kneeling position and getting a shot off. Getting in the kneeling position and getting a shot off. And learning when you can make the shot, when you can't make the shot. Learning when not to shoot. But getting in a good, fairly decent kneeling position. Kneeling is a fairly common field position because it's quick to get into and quick to get out of. You might get into a kneeling position looking at that animal, that deer, and then it steps and moves, and you have to step and move. You have to get up and get into another position somewhere else. Kneeling is good because it's easy to get into and get out of. It's one of the more common field positions, certainly in my experience, more common than a prone position, but it's something that you should practice, and it's one of the more stable ones. So practice that. Practice getting in a kneeling position and getting a shot off, knowing when good is good enough to get a good hit. And then after that, you probably know what I'm going to say, practice getting down in the kneeling position and getting multiple shots off. Again, for big game practice, probably no more than 3 in a row, and then start over, because hopefully you're not going to need more than that. So the 3 shots in a row with the kneeling. And then the majority of this practice is going to be from standing. Practice standing, shooting 50 yards, 6-inch plate, 8-inch plate. If you don't have a steel plate, then like a dinner plate, not like a ceramic plate, but like a paper plate, like that you would eat on, a normal size plate, that would work okay. So practicing getting hits on that. From the standing position. Practice doing that. Again, I'd say at least 5 times, good decent hits. Bringing the gun up in a snap shooting position, like standing naturally, bringing the gun up to your eye. Again, not bringing your head down to the gun, but bringing the gun up to your eye and getting a hit on target standing, meaning standing unsupported. I usually say offhand, but a lot of people, when they hear offhand, they think I mean like left-handed. Offhand means standing unsupported and, general shooting vernacular. But offhand, standing, I wouldn't even worry about the sling unless they're familiar with shooting from a sling. But just standing, getting a hit on target, and doing that at least 5 times, and then going into multiple shots. I would practice doing that several times. I would make that the bulk of your practice, Because in my experience, if you're spot and stalk still hunting, the majority of your shots are going to be from a standing. Tracking, those kind of things. The majority is going to be from the standing. If you have time to get in a better position, that's great. But if not, you should be comfortable with a standing position. And if you're good in standing, you're probably going to be better at kneeling and better still at prone. You could practice sitting. Sitting is also one of those field positions that's nice because it's not fast to get into, but it's a lot more comfortable. You can stay in a sitting position a long time, hours if need be. Whereas you may not want to stay in a kneeling for more than a few minutes. It can be very uncomfortable. So I would practice those, and I would practice the follow-up shots. That's kind of important. Now, when we are talking about this is what I'm talking about for Western spot and stalk, still hunting, tracking. If you're the guy that, sits off glasses off with a giant spotting scope and sits there and you're going to shoot and dial and play with fidget spinners and electronics, then you obviously are going to have a very different kind of practice. That's not what I'm talking about here. I'm talking about the way that I like to hunt, spot and stalk and still hunting. But take what applies here to you and put it into practice. If you hunt out of a deer stand, put the deer stand up in your yard or wherever you can shoot and shoot from your deer stand. If you can't live fire because you live on the East Coast and you can't just shoot wherever you want, then, put the deer stand up in your yard and dry fire. So you get used to that. Again, apply what applies to you. If you've hunted for a long time and you've only ever shot out of a deer stand, then you probably aren't going to shoot standing. So practice shooting out of your deer stand. But take what applies to you and do some training with the 22. I think it's a valuable tool. Anyway, with that, guys, let's go to the tactical verse of the day, and then we'll close it out. Since the whole episode was kind of a tactical tip, training with the 22. Whoever has no rule over his own spirit is like a city broken down without walls. Much like mastering, this is my commentary, much like mastering many other things in life, mastering the rifle means mastering yourself first. Discipline, diligence, grit, stick-to-itiveness, all those things. The rifle is kind of a secondary thing that is a tool that puts that into action. With that, guys, thanks for listening and have a blessed day.